We know that pop culture and social media has an impact on all of us and all of our beliefs. So I think, it's an important topic.
I'm Michael Tamblyn, CEO of Rakuten Kobo. We make e-readers and apps, we sell ebooks and audiobooks, we build a lot of technology that helps people spend more time reading. But in our hearts, we are booksellers and readers. So when we have a chance to bring authors to the Kobo offices, I get a chance to bring them to our studio here in Liberty Village, Toronto, to learn a bit about their careers, creative process, and their reading and writing lives. And hopefully you will too. Welcome to Kobo in Conversation. My guest today is Timothy Caulfield. As an academic, he is a heavyweight, the Canada Research Chair in Health Law and Policy, a professor in the Faculty of Law and the School of Public Health, and Research Director of the Health Law Institute at the University of Alberta. He has published more than 350 scholarly articles on everything from stem cells and genetics to research ethics and science policy. He's a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, but he also breaks out of the world of research to write popular books about health and science. Both of his first books, The Cure for Everything, Untangling the Twisted Messages about Health, Fitness, and Happiness, and The Vaccination Picture, discussed the damaging and distorted world of health claims and anti-vaxxers. He then hosted and co-produced a documentary TV show, A User's Guide to Cheating Death, which has been shown in over 60 countries. His 2015 book has just been reissued, and the timing couldn't be better. As we do on Kobo in Conversation, we'll be asking Timothy about his own history as a reader and writer, but we will start with talking about his book, The Science of Celebrity. Is Gwyneth Paltrow wrong about everything? Timothy Caulfield, welcome to Kobo.
Thanks for having me on.
The very last chapter of this book is called The Dream Crusher. And that could almost be an alternate title for this entire book. Diets, detoxes, gluten, how you become famous, whether it's even worth being famous. You systematically dissect it all. And like many dissected things, it's not pretty. What made you decide to take a deep dive into all of the fallacies and deceptions that surround celebrity?
That's hilarious you say that. I thought about calling the book Nothing Works. Maybe too dark. It was a little bit too dark. One of the reasons I got into this is because it really was a tie back to my academic work. As an academic, I really try to aggregate what the science says on a particular topic, in the context of health, whether you're talking about diets or whether you're talking about, a public health initiative. And you really get the sense that the science is so often twisted, and a lot of that twist comes from pop culture. So that really kind of brought me into the pop culture space. But I also admit I just love pop culture. I always have loved pop culture. So it was kind of fun to live in that world while I was working on the book. And as you know, in the book, I really do try to live in that world. But the other thing I find fascinating, this is sort of the latter half of the book that really touches on the Dream Crusher title, is to look at the way in which celebrity has become our goal and the way it shapes the decisions that we make, and how much of that is really an illusion. So the first half of the book is more about the kind of stuff I think maybe people may be more familiar with me, if they are familiar with me at all, and that's a very small cohort, is about debunking these crazy kind of therapies and diets and stuff and beauty regimes. But the latter half is really more about that impact it has on our ambitions and our life decisions.
Gwyneth Paltrow shows up in the subtitle and is almost a character in the book. At least she's a looming, shining, well-hydrated, detoxified presence. Why is she central for you in all of this?
It's interesting because some people think, oh, the book is about her. But as you know, it's not. It's not about her, because she is such a great example of the impact of pop culture and the way pop culture handles science and health information. She's a great anecdote, which is interesting. I'm going to come back to that. And what's fascinating is when I first started writing this, and you know well how long it takes to write a book and how that process plays out. So you got to go back to 2012, 2013, where I always started thinking about this. And her company, Goop, just started then, right? It wasn't like it was this massive presence that we have now. It just started then. So I thought it was almost a quirky example of the role of pop culture. And she was saying all these ridiculous things. But holy cow, since the book came out in 2015, she has accelerated. I haven't been able to keep up with her. She's gotten, saying more outrageous things, and her presence in our lives has become bigger. And so, that was a little bit of luck, I have to admit. I didn't anticipate that her presence would grow to the degree it has. But the fact, her Gwyneth Paltrow as an example of pop culture in this space has become only better since the book came out.
And just to be clear, I mean, you don't come into this as, you're not trying to do a takedown. You're not trying to pull down a celebrity. You're more going after the specifics. Do the things that she recommends, that other celebrities recommend, actually have any basis in science?
That's right. And, I really try not to do takedowns. Sometimes it's hard, it's hard. And to be honest with you, since the book came out, I think people, would say, oh, for sure you're trying to take her down, because she has said things that are even more aggravating, right? More harmful. And when a celebrity does that, I think it's entirely fair. Like if a celebrity gives advice about, get a colonic, don't get vaccines. If they give sort of harmful advice, I think it's entirely appropriate to have a science-based response to that. But you're right. I don't try to shame people into not liking pop culture. I love pop culture. I follow it all the time. And so that's not the point, right? The point is really to get into the specifics, but also to get a sense of why people are attracted to this. Why are we all, every one of us, attracted to this? And why does it have so much influence? Because that's the other thing you hear. I'm sure you hear this too. Oh, my kooky neighbor may, listen to Kim Kardashian, but not me. This isn't relevant to me. Well, we know that's not true. We know that pop culture and social media has an impact on all of us and all of our beliefs. So I think, it's an important topic.
Well, and some things seem to just jump out of popular culture and into the public consciousness. A great example that starts off the book. It seems like every January, everyone I know is doing a cleanse. This idea that by changing what you eat or how you eat, you can rid the body of toxins. But as you describe it, the science says that it doesn't work.
You're right. And that I do think that's a great example. I believe that the idea of detoxification and cleansing wouldn't exist but for the celebrity embrace of that idea, right? And for sure, Gwyneth Paltrow has been a big part of that celebrity embrace. And it's completely science-free. I actually love this topic because you don't have to pull your punches. You don't have to equivocate at all on what the science says. On the one hand, no, it doesn't work. It's scientifically absurd. It's not scientifically plausible. But think of the degree to which that idea has taken root. I think there's almost now this intuitive belief in the idea of cleanses and detoxification. And that this is inherently good and that we should all be doing it. And something I talk about in the book is it's almost like if you're not doing it, you're doing something wrong. And if you are doing it, it's a virtuous practice, right, that should be encouraged. You're not on a vain diet trying to get sexy abs. You're on a cleanse, good for you, do your best.
And yet, as you go into the details and start to go down a couple of layers, you realize it's not even really clear what these toxins are or where they're stored or what metabolic process is actually being used to get them out of your body.
Yeah, ask someone who recommends a cleanse, what am I detoxifying? How does this process work? How can you measure that it's really detoxifying at all? How come it, your kidneys and your liver, those, do the detoxification. And let's not forget, I tried this. I went because I like to get involved and try to experience all of these things. And so I went on Gwyneth's cleanse. It's called the Clean Cleanse. I met with her doctor in Hollywood. I can't believe he agreed to meet with me, but he did. And he, told me to go on this cleanse. And he told me, first of all, I needed to detoxify my body. Secondly, that I needed to try to reverse adrenal fatigue, which is a celebrity made up ailment. no science behind it at all, and that I would have all these benefits. So I try it, and it is extremely difficult. There was no coffee for 3 weeks, if you can believe that. I can barely go like a half a day without a coffee. Imagine doing it for 3 weeks. And I think that that's another thing that's appealing about these cleanses, not the not the no coffee. It's like climbing a mountain, right? It's like running a marathon. If you complete it, it feels like you've accomplished something. And I think that's another selling feature, believe it or not, that you've done this, you feel good about yourself, and you're taking action, even if that action has no science behind it and in fact may be harmful.
And the idea that, okay, maybe if the cleansing itself isn't working, if the toxins aren't actually being removed, maybe this still has some other health benefits, like maybe it's helping me lose weight. But as your own experience pointed out, it doesn't even really help you lose weight either.
That's right. You lose weight because look, it's a super restricted diet. The one I went on, it was like a shake in the morning, and then you have this really restricted list of things that you can eat, and then shake at night. That was it for 3 weeks. So, are you going to lose weight? Yeah, you're on an extreme diet. It's a crash diet. That's what you're doing. You're doing a crash diet for 3 weeks. And what was fascinating? I talk a little bit about this in the book. So here I am, someone who's I used to do a lot of obesity policy, and so well aware of the research around weight loss and how we need to be careful how we think of our weight, and weight stigma and all. I know all of that, and I'm still thrilled that when I step on the scale as I'm doing this, the weight's coming off. Right? I'm still, because we're so bombarded with the message that weight loss is a noble thing to do, and if you lose weight, it's good, right? So I'm still thrilled. But more interestingly, I knew it was going to come back on, right? I absolutely knew it. And as soon as I came off the cleanse, the weight came right back. And I lost a lot of weight. Like I'm not, I like to think I'm, a healthy weight, but I lost 11, 12 pounds. It came back immediately. And the funny thing was, I was depressed about it. Even though I knew it was coming back on, and even though I should be realistic about it, it still gets you down. And isn't that a great example of how this all works, and the impact of pop culture messaging around this kind of thing, around weight, around body image, around what we should be doing.
And you did have that one glorious moment where the weight was off and you could feel like, yes, this is actually working. All of this pain and suffering that I've put myself through has obviously paid off.
Right. And I even took a picture. So because it was this brief moment where I had abs.
You should. You earned a picture.
What a crazy thing to do. I've got the abs, and no, I'm not gonna post it. But yeah, it lasted. I had abs for an afternoon. So, and then I went back to middle-aged Tim.
Going back to a point you were talking about earlier, I once had a naturopath describe me a range of supplements because they had determined that I had adrenal fatigue. And I also had to give up coffee, which was hazardous to me and everyone around me, and gave me real fatigue. But it sounds like my adrenal glands are just fine.
They are just fine. Adrenal fatigue really is, I'm not sure if I like this term because it's probably too pejorative, but, they call it an internet disease. It is a disease or an ailment that has sort of intuitive appeal. You're feeling tired, you're feeling run down. This is what you need to do. And I want to be careful because people may have those symptoms, right? And they may be searching for an answer. And I think it's important to listen to people, and in the vaccination picture, the last word in the whole book is listen, because I think it's really important to also understand, why are people attracted to this stuff. In my career, I've tried just about every kind of alternative practitioner you can think of because I want to get that experience, and almost without exception, it's been a positive experience, right? They're listening to you, they give you some actionable thing to do. So I get it, even though there's absolutely no evidence to support almost anything that they provide.
And so your research shows it doesn't support. This shows that it doesn't work. Doctors say that treatments like this don't work, and the media has in many cases said it too. So why do we still believe?
I think there's a bunch going on. First of all, I think depending on the modality, the media is not always great. Sometimes they do. Detoxing is a good example. I think over the last couple of years, the media's got better with that, but we've certainly seen that concepts like detoxing and cleansing was legitimized in the popular press. So I think that's one thing. The other thing, they often have this intuitive appeal. sort of makes intuitive sense. Who wants toxins residing in their bodies? Yeah, I want to detoxify too. So I think there's that aspect to it. I also think that just we're exposed to it so much. There's the illusory truth phenomenon. We're exposed to it so much, and that this is thanks to celebrities largely, but also just people blogging about it, sharing on social media, that if you see something enough, it seems real, right? And I think that's also what's happening. And also there's just effective marketing going on, right? You see that a lot. There's a health halo now almost surrounding something like detoxing. If you see that word in a product, you believe it works. And we've seen that in other areas, like gluten-free is another example, which I talk about in the book. And I talk about it in my forthcoming book too. Even though there's no science to support it, that phrase has a health halo effect. If it's on a product, it seems like it's going to be effective. So I think there are a lot of cultural forces that are driving that. And also what I've just talked about, when people try it, this is really interesting too. People try it, right? You go on this cleanse and it seems like it works, right? So you attribute the benefits of losing weight and you're taking action so you feel good about yourself to the cleanse. But when the weight comes back on, that's your fault. You screwed up. So you go back to getting another crash diet or another cleanse, and the circle repeats itself.
And so you came up with your own diet, which should be featured on the front pages of Us Weekly or People magazine. Can you describe for us the life-changing Caulfield Cleanse?
First of all, you've got to cleanse yourself of all the misinformation out there, right? And I think that it's maybe a little bit overstating, in simplicity, but it's true. I think we really need to try to cleanse ourselves of the misinformation. And since I wrote the book, and this is one of the I think the benefits of the growing recognition of the harm of misinformation, there's been more research showing that we really can do this. We can teach critical thinking skills, and we can apply them. And the other thing that we can do is that we cannot share misinformation. So cleanse yourself of the misinformation for yourself, but also for others. And the other thing we can do is just embrace those evidence-based simple things that we can do to live a healthy lifestyle. Of course, this is one of the reasons I think all that pop culture noise is so harmful, and there's research to back this up, is because it distracts us, right? It distracts us from doing those simple things that we can all do to live a healthy lifestyle. And it's you don't smoke, you exercise, you eat a healthy diet, and that sounds like a cheat. It sounds like an oversimplification, but it's not. There's really no magic around a healthy diet. If you look at all the longitudinal studies, they all say the same thing. It's lots of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, healthy proteins. There really is no magic, and there's a lot of flexibility under that definition. Try to maintain a healthy weight. That is probably one of the toughest one. And we recognize that we all come in different shapes and sizes and can be healthy in all those different shapes and sizes. I think it's really important to recognize that. And you surround yourself with people you love, and you get a good night's sleep, and that's really about it. That is cleanse yourself of the misinformation and adopt those science-informed steps. And that really is it.
And the only problem with your diet really seems to be that it's very difficult for you to charge people for doing these things. That that these really are all basic rules of thumbs that we can all follow ourselves without having to buy a book, without having to buy a supplement, without having to enroll in a multi-$1,000 cleanse regime.
It's hard to sell exercise. I've even changed a little bit on this topic. My first book for the general public, the Cure for Everything, I really pushed this idea of interval training and lifting weights, and I still believe that. I think if from an efficiency perspective, those are probably the best things you can do. But increasingly, I think just move. If you like walking, that's awesome. If you like flipping tires in your backyard, that's awesome. Just move. And I think the research says that over and over again. You're right. It's hard to sell and package these things. And that's why I think you'll see even sensible advice. Like you'll get these lifestyle, these wellness gurus, providing what's basically what I just described in some kind of fancy package, right? So it's exercise and eat real food wrapped in a blanket of pseudoscience, right? They just can't tell you to do that. They've got to figure out some kind of spin on it. So you're 100% correct. It's very difficult to sell that. And it's difficult also, if you're Dr. Oz, to have many seasons of TV shows telling people to do those things.
As you mentioned, some of this comes back to ground you covered in your first book, The Cure for Everything. What made you decide to revisit the topic a few years later?
I think for sure that the Gwyneth book, as I'll call it, the celebrity book, really is about the twisting of health and science in our world, and also the power of pop culture. And part of that is, again, informed a little bit by the research I was doing in my academic life, where you really got a sense of the power. And one of the best examples, of course, is the anti-vax debate that we've seen. You really get a sense of how even a handful of voices can impact how we perceive something that's vitally important to our health, and not just our health, but our community's health, and the world's health. So I think that's what really nudged me in that direction. And also the sort of that latter half of the book, the impact that pop culture has on all of our decisions, from parenting to what we want to be when we grow up. Pop culture really is playing an unprecedented role right now.
As we get into the book, you switch gears into the industry of beauty, specifically anything that is supposed to firm or tone or diminish cellulite or sculpt or cause my skin to glow. I've always wanted my skin to glow, and I somehow never been able to make that happen. There's a phrase that you use, which is, beauty advice is a science-free zone. Can you unpack that a little bit for me?
It is a science-free zone. It is incredible when you think of this multi-billion-dollar industry that is largely devoid of science. I want to be really careful here because there are chemists, et cetera, that work in the beauty industry.
There's lots of science involved in making it.
and there is stuff that works. But the stuff that works generally is prescription strength. You've got to go to a doctor to get it. But when you're talking about, anti-aging, let's keep it real simple. I don't want my skin to age, or I want to get rid of the wrinkles I have. There really isn't much that you can do beyond stay out of the sun, don't smoke, get a good night's sleep, exercise. Those are the things that are, and by the way, have really good genes. That's probably the number one thing. Pick your parents. Make sure you've got good parents. That's probably the biggest thing. Everything else is just almost total nonsense, right? Even moisturizing, right? People think about, oh yeah, my skin looks better. Well, that's temporary, right? You look at the longitudinal studies, it's very unclear if that has an impact. There is stuff around retinol, absolutely. Mostly it should be prescription strength, because over-the-counter stuff, there's this huge variance in what is in the products. It's almost totally a science-free zone.
And you ran your own skincare test on yourself.
I did. So I went to a dermatologist, and the dermatologist advised that I go see this beauty specialist. And so this person, people are probably quite familiar with these places where they do an assessment of your skin, have this machine that they kind of measure what kind of products you need, how old your skin is, how damaged it is, and then they recommend that you use all these products. And I got all these really expensive products, and I can't remember how much it was hundreds of dollars worth of, the high end stuff. And I used it pretty religiously for 8 months, I think it was. I should remember this. I used it pretty religiously, right? So the whole idea was I was going to be a before and after. But then I did a little twist on it. I went to another dermatologist for the after. And so this dermatologist didn't know that I had done any of this stuff. And his assessment was worse. Like, I'd gotten worse, if you believe the second dermatologist. Now, that I probably didn't get worse. I think the most important takeaway here is, despite these efforts, it didn't have a measurable or obvious impact. That's the most kind of friendly interpretation you can give to my experience. Didn't have a dramatic impact. I generally just use, look, I'm a pretty vain guy too. So it's not like I don't care what I look like. But I'm a soap and water.
So you wanted this to work. It wasn't that you didn't want it to work.
Yeah, bring it on. bring it on. I wanted it to work. What's really interesting, there's research, and I talk about it in the book, I believe it's from Toronto, where they did research and talking to women. And of course, I've talked to, as a lot of scholars in the book about the huge pressure on women in this context. But this study found that women often know this stuff doesn't work, and they use it anyway, right? Because couple things going on there. Probably they might just find a ritual comforting. But the more sort of cynical view is that they're under so much pressure that they feel they've got to do something, right? They've got to try it regardless, even if it probably doesn't work. And there's also this belief that the more expensive something is, the more likely it is going to work, even though there's no evidence to support that either.
Even what seemed like a fairly common sense prescription around hydration turns out not to have much science behind it. My 17-year-old stepdaughter, who is smart and generally skeptical and aware, is also absolutely convinced that drinking massive amounts of water is critical to health and well-being. There are water bottles positioned at strategic locations through our house and cars and backpacks, and it's the same for all of her friends and for my grown-up friends. But it turns out that we don't need that to the same degree that beauty experts are telling us either.
We do not. The ounces of water a day, that myth, everyone's heard it, right?
Absolutely. Timers on phones to make sure that you're drinking your 8 glasses of water a day.
You can get smart bottles, right, that will ping when you're supposed to drink. No evidence to support it at all. Isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing? It's, you drink when you're thirsty. Thank you, evolution, right? You drink when you're thirsty. No evidence. It's not going to make your skin glow, and it is one of those myths that will not die, and I give public lectures. I often, use that as an example, and people are astounded, and there's often people in the audience with their water bottles, their stainless steel water bottles. Funny that you should bring that up, because just yesterday, my 18-year-old daughter was sort of mocking me for not drinking. So here's my daughter. She's heard me rant on this all the time, and she still buys into it. And the interesting thing is, I think the fact that people continue to believe this, even though there's no evidence to support it, and often doctors say there's no evidence to support it, is a good example of the power of pop culture, because it's just this belief that's been absorbed by pop culture. We keep hearing it over and over again. It has intuitive appeal. Water's good for you. More would be better. And so I think that's why it lives on. And look, you do need to drink enough. You don't want to be, completely dehydrated. But, the water in your coffee counts. The water in your apple counts. You drink when you're thirsty.
The second part of this book moves from health to fame, and specifically the idea that fame has become almost the primary goal of many young people. Historically, is that a new thing for us?
It is a new thing. Of course, celebrities have always been around. And of course, kids always dreamed of being successful and having some exciting career. But as you know from the book, there has been a radical shift. And it's gone from, there's surveys that were done not even that long ago where kids said they wanted to be an astronaut, they wanted to be a teacher, they wanted to be a scientist. And about 5 years ago, you do those surveys and kids want to be a pop star, professional athlete, actor, right? That's what they want to be, or just celebrity. They just say, I want to be a celebrity. Do that survey now. And I talk about this in the updated version of the book. They want to be an influencer. There's some studies that show that's the number one thing that kids want to be now, an influencer, which is just such a, that really is being famous for being famous. That's really what it is. It's, fame kind of stripped of all of the attributes of talent and ability. Now, I want to be real careful here, because really talented people have emerged on social media platforms, no doubt about it. But when you say that you want to be an influencer, you're really saying you want fame as a byproduct of fame. So that is a fascinating shift.
When we think about becoming famous, whether we're talking about music or acting or sports or the new venues in social media, you give some fairly daunting math when it comes to whether or not someone can become famous in a particular field and what the statistical likelihood of that is.
I'm going to start with my grim conclusion here. Sort of you're not going to be famous.
Back to your role of the destroyer of dreams.
Yeah, this is the destroyer of dreams. You're not going to be famous. It's like, I think that it seems being famous seems closer now. It seems more tangible. Because I think partly because of social media, I could do that. Look at that famous person. They're in their house and they're famous. It feels closer. And, and it's interesting because I even talk to people in the entertainment industry and they kind of believe it too. Now everyone can be famous. No, because the denominator now is even bigger, right? It's even bigger. But I break it down with sports. If you know a hockey player right now, so let's say there's a 14-year-old hockey player that is a superstar in your community, and everyone's saying that that person's even, I mean, a superstar, completely dominating. If I was I would bet you $10,000 that that person never even sees $10,000. That person doesn't even see NHL ice ever. Now that's a real bet. So if they're not on, you got to give me the odds on that. It is incredibly difficult, and it's almost always based on luck, 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 luck. Genes plus luck, right? It's really incredibly daunting. And an actor, a dancer, the chances are even smaller. And then one of the reasons I think it's really important to recognize that, I don't mean to be a dream crusher, and I talk about in the book, and I talked to a lot of experts and world-renowned acting coaches, and they all say the same thing. The reason why it's so problematic is if people are focused, this is a cliche, but I'm going with it here, bear with me. If people are focused on that goal, they don't enjoy the journey, right? And they don't enjoy the craft, and they don't enjoy why they're doing it. You can be, an amazing actor, an amazing musician, an amazing athlete, and the important thing is to, that intrinsic value of doing it for those reasons. The fame, if it ever comes, is because of luck. And yes, often talent is a prerequisite, obviously, but, really enjoy, be doing it for the right reasons. And I know that's a horrible cliche, but sometimes cliches are true.
In my first degree, I trained to be a composer. And at no point...
Oh my gosh, yeah. Poet, composer, there you go.
I know. At no point in the beginning of my degree did anyone say, there is a 1 in n thousandth chance of making a successful living as a composer. Never mind as a, Canadian composer of contemporary classical music. Why doesn't that message get delivered? And shouldn't that be something that people are hearing as they're starting to embark in some of these careers?
I think we don't hear it for a bunch of reasons. One, there's a fame industry out there. I tried out for, in the book, I tried out for American Idol. I start with American Idol, right? And I really did try out for American Idol. And then I also tried out for a modeling agency. And there's a huge industry out there. And think about the industry around hockey. Think about the industry around almost any kind of fame profession, right? So they don't want you to know that. They want you to think if you work hard. The message is if you work hard, you can attain anything. So there's a little bit of also, I think, that North American kind of feel to it. The other thing is, and this is totally speculative, I talk about in the last chapter of the book, is there is also, I think, a connection between this belief in celebrity as a way to rise up and social stratification. In the countries that have the least amount of social mobility, you see the most reverence of fame. Now, I think Canada's a little bit of an outlier, so I'll come back to that. But the two, if you look at the OECD, all the wealthy countries, the ones that have the most social disparity and the least amount of social mobility are the United States and the UK. The United States, I think, has the least amount of social mobility, which is ironic because people always think about the American dream. But the chance of social mobility in the United States is very small as compared to the Scandinavian countries. And I think that it's like this dream that you can move, rise above. And I think that's one of the reasons pop culture likes this idea so much. And if you think of a show like American Idol, or really any of those fame-based shows, it really is portrayed as a noble pursuit. You'll see people that have hardship in their life, and maybe one of their parents is dying, but they should be going to this competition anyway because it's something that they've always dreamed about. And I think, and again, it's the N is, the sample size isn't very big, so this is speculation, but absolutely, I think the United States and UK are two countries that have the greatest reverence and the most fascination in fame. I'll give you one anecdote. I was in Iceland, and who's the most famous Icelandic person you can think of?
Bjork.
Bjork, exactly. So I was giving a talk in Iceland, and a beautiful country. And this is, a couple of years ago, it wasn't quite as trendy as it is now. And after my lecture, they take me out for dinner to this beautiful restaurant. And who's sitting right next to me but Bjork? And she was treated absolutely 100% like a normal citizen in Iceland. There was no fame. Actually, I was the only one in the restaurant that was kind of freaking out because I'm also a fan. My host actually said, don't look at her, leave her alone. And I tried to position myself so she had to look at me so I could say that I had an interaction with Bjork. Didn't happen, by the way. Bjork, I bet, couldn't walk down the street in New York. I bet she couldn't walk down the street in London. Now, that's an anecdote. And maybe if there's someone from Iceland, they disagree with me. But that was certainly my impression. And I've been fortunate to travel in Finland and Norway and Sweden. And you certainly don't see that same kind of reverence for celebrity in those countries. And those are the countries with the highest amount of social mobility. Now, I'm really stretching here. It's a lot of speculation, but I think something's there.
The U.S. has always had the Horatio Alger myth, the idea of you can work really hard and propel yourself from one social strata to another. But this seems like a different kind of class mobility, that you can be launched or catapulted, that you could be kind of just plucked up and moved to another sphere, almost like by magic.
Like magic. So, and there's another element to it. It's almost like it's the opiate of the masses now. And it's a horrible, I don't want to go, turn back to Marx here, but there is that idea that, this is something that people can look to that will give them hope. And there are so many movies about this, and there's these, shows like American Idol that really revere this concept. It's this magical transformation. And what's interesting about it also is, think about the destination, right? It's as if that destination of fame and celebrity is something that we should aspire to, that it is a magical place that you're going to, and that your life will be transformed and you will be happier and all your problems will go away. When of course we know that's not true either, right? There's not a lot of research on it, but the research that exists shows they are no happier, right? They, in fact, some evidence that they're less happy. And so the journey is an illusion and the goal is an illusion, which is really fascinating when you think about the degree to which that entire idea occupies our culture.
And so, taking your Bjork example as kind of one position on a spectrum, is there a healthier or less damaging form of fame? Could you be legal scholar famous, or not-for-profit famous, or nonfiction author famous, and not bring on as much of that baggage with you?
That's a great question. I do think that, so there's definitely, we could make that, I'll put it this way, we can make the journey healthier for sure, right? I think we should. And to be honest with you, I think that is starting to happen a little bit. The way that people think about things like hockey, and the way that people think about, being a musician. I think that's partly because the whole industry is been transformed. But I think we're starting to see a little bit of shift there, in making the journey a little bit different. And even being an author, you work in this industry. And when I first started writing, I had other authors tell me, they warned me, and this is something, I was already been an academic writer for years. They said, you write because you love writing, right? That, I'm sure you've heard that too. You don't write to sell books, you write because you love writing. It's a craft. And I think that message is starting to permeate our world a little bit more. I'm curious if you agree with that. But the thing at the end, the celebrity, that's a tough one, because look, celebrity culture is not going away. Social media is not going away. All those things aren't going away. So I do think we need to think of a way that we can transform the idea of celebrity and make it more of a constructive force. Unfortunately, I don't have a simple answer for you, but I think it's a worthy pursuit.
Let's talk a bit more about reading and writing, and we can start at the beginning. What were books that were formative for you when you were first getting your sense of yourself as a reader?
So you're going to be monstrously disappointed, because I'm going to give you all of these kind of real classic kind of examples. So
I'm really hard to disappoint on these questions. These are good ones.
Okay, so I'm a science geek. I always have been a science geek, and so no surprise, the books that I loved, and they're still my happy place, are those classic science fiction books.
Mm-hmm.
Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov. I mean, I love them, and then I love some of the quirky ones like Stanislaw Lem, the Polish sci-fi writer. I always love those books, and I still do. And in fact, I recently reread. I don't know if you've ever done this, gone back to books you loved when you were a kid.
Oh, yeah.
And Childhood's End, I reread that very recently, actually, and it's even better than I remember it. It's totally taken away again. And so so that's, as I said, no surprise, right? I'm a science geek, and I love those books, and I still love science fiction. I actually think if I had to pick one book that made me want to be a writer, and maybe this is going to be a surprise to you also. One book that made me want to be a writer, it was Barbara Tuchman's The Guns of August.
Oh, good one.
A nonfiction. I think I was in grade 10, and it was the first time I thought, first of all, how exciting and how beautiful nonfiction can be written, right? And how engaging it can be. And I was also just enthralled with this idea of knowing a topic as well as she obviously did, and being able to dive into it and talk about it and explain it. I was absolutely fascinated. And sort of from that book on, I became this big nonfiction fan, and I read all of her books, Distant Mirror. So if I think that, and it was so beautifully written too. And so I think that would be, and then later on, for my more recent stuff, again, this is gonna be no surprise. I love Bill Bryson. Is it okay to say that?
Of course it is.
Answer. What he writes so beautifully. It's always funny. But I love the way, I'm always so impressed with, and there's a group of writers who are like this, with writers that can almost trick you into learning something. Do you know what I mean by that? Like, they have some really complex topic that they take you on a journey, and you're laughing and you're following it, and throughout that, they kind of trick you into this learning about this complex area.
You are a lawyer, an academic, which makes you an author by default in the scholarly sense, but then at some point you also decided to be a writer of popular nonfiction. Where did that transformation take place? What flipped that switch?
I think it was, I wish I could say there's this moment. I kind of creeped into it. I started writing more for the popular press, writing more comments, and I actually found, I thought, this would make a good book. This would be something that would be fun to write about. And I actually think it might have been, inspired by people like Bill Bryson and A.J. Jacobs. A.J. Jacobs, he wrote
Yes.
the book, The Year of Living Biblically.
Mm-hmm.
I think that came out like in 2009 or something like that. And I actually thought, I think there were a lot of books of like that. And I thought, I think what I'm seeing play out in science and health policy, I think this would be fun to write. And I have a colleague named Curtis Gillespie, he's a writer also, and I really owe him a lot of credit, because he really nudged me to do this and said, yeah, absolutely. And my first thought, I'll make it an academic book that has a little bit of a pop, general public vibe to it. He goes, no, go all in, and I'm so glad he did. And the other really, I think, big shift is, I love writing academic stuff. I never want to leave that. But there's not as much of the writing process involved, right? I love writing. I do a lot of things in my life. I feel very fortunate. But if I had to pick one thing, I don't know if people ever ask you this, if you could just do one, it would definitely be writing. Like, that's what I love the absolute most. And you get that more. I think the act of writing, thinking about what a sentence looks like, what a paragraph looks like, in this realm, much more so than you do in the academic realm.
Coming back to the science of celebrity for just a second, one of the themes that comes up in this book over and over is how resistant people are to information that contradicts what they want to believe. And that seems like something that we're seeing everywhere right now, that people select the truth that they want. They select the science that they want. Is that something that's getting worse, or are we just more aware of it now?
Both. I think both. I think that it is getting worse because of things like social media and our ability to create confirmation bubbles surrounding ourselves. The fragmentation of the media has facilitated this, allowing, to get information that aligns with your ideology. So I think it's getting worse in that sense. And we're also becoming more aware of it, because I think there's more and more research on point. So we're more aware of it. And I actually think it is getting worse. And so we need to think of creative communication strategies to break that down, right? To talk to everyone else. And that's another reason, right? That's another reason for taking research and trying to putting it out into the public through books, right? Through art, through documentaries. I think we need to think of creative communication strategies that unify us and allow us to talk across those barriers.
And as we are recording this, we're in the middle of a pandemic right now. And it feels like that larger theme of people not trusting science or wanting to be able to pick their own science isn't just now manifesting in how they vote or which television network they want, but is now putting people in real danger. So does it feel like we're starting to get some of those tools and some of those communication strategies that can help break through some of those filter bubbles?
This is a tragic example. We're living through a tragic example of the impact of misinformation, all the things that we've talked about, right? The impact of pop culture spin, to spin science and to spin what the facts are on a topic. It is a remarkable time. We're actually studying exactly how the misinformation in the context of the pandemic is playing out. But you're right, there is good news. So I'm hopeful that one of the legacies of this crisis is going to be a greater understanding of the value of good independent science, a greater understanding of why we need to have trustworthy entities like the World Health Organization. I think it's really important to highlight that word worthy. We have to make sure that these entities are worthy of our trust, but also the credible impact of tolerating pseudoscience and the impact of misinformation. I think there's going to be a greater understanding of both of those things. But we are learning, I think, about how we can break down those barriers and what we can do to sort of stop the spread of misinformation. One of them is just to try to get people to stop and think before they spread misinformation. People want to be accurate and trying to encourage, nudge people to do that. But the other way we can do it, and there's good evidence to back this up, is good storytelling, good narratives, good books. There's a lot of really interesting research on the power of a good story to convey meaning and to get people to remember those things. So I'm not talking about fighting anecdote with anecdote. I'm talking about using a good story, a compelling art form, even not just a story, a compelling art form to get across the good science. I'm hopeful that that message is going to be learned and embraced post the pandemic.
I can think of no better place to leave it than that. Timothy, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed our discussion.
I've been speaking with Timothy Caulfield. Timothy's latest book is The Science of Celebrity. Is Gwyneth Paltrow wrong about everything? It and the other books we've mentioned here, along with previous episodes of the podcast, can be found at kobo.com/conversation. There are so many good authors to be found there. This is the last regular season episode of Season 2 of Kobo and Conversation. We'll be dropping bonus episodes into the feed while we work on Season 3, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Keep an ear out for more staff picks while Kobo carries on working from home, as well as a surprise guest or two along the way. And please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, or wherever you subscribe.